Peace to the family. I want to say blessed Juneteenth and Viva Guerrero. All right. Well, for most African Americans, Afro-Mexicans, Juneteenth is a historic holiday, though it's recently come into, commercial prominence and celebration via normalization in the United States under the presidency of Joe Biden. But historically, Juneteenth was celebrated in a lot of cities, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, most in particular in Galveston, Texas. I want to say big up to Galveston, Texas, and that area of Texas, because they had been celebrating Juneteenth for years and years, right? Today I want to speak about Juneteenth and, starting some of your own traditions for Juneteenth. Okay, for me, I started my Juneteenth really last week, and it was celebrated several places here in Atlanta, Stonecrest, Piedmont Park. But last weekend was the weekend celebrations of Juneteenth, right? Pretty large, nice turnouts, even though we had rain here in Atlanta. And it also corresponded with No King's Day. So you saw solidarity amongst the African Americans and the Afro-Latino population and the Latino populations. And that's where I'm driving for this celebration. But again, I just want to say that a tradition that I started was to do some khidmah. That's the Arabic term for community service. But I did khidmah today, community service. And I was fortunate and honored enough to continue to do community service, self-service, with the Columbia Drive United Methodist Church. They have a food drive every Thursday. I'm saying this in particular because I'm aware that during the cuts of this book, of this era, they're having some problems, getting the food that they provide to at least 50 families per week, right? So if you have resources, any resources, reach out to these people that are doing this good service in our community. So like I say, today I was able to practice some khidmah and practice some self-service, some community service via the Columbia Drive United Methodist Church. So I'm thankful for these people for allowing me to liberate some people from hunger, right? Everybody needs food. We need that liberation. And sometimes the liberation is not the shackles and the chains, but it's, food, clothing, and shelter. Okay. Juneteenth. What is Juneteenth? Juneteenth is, I guess that was June the what, 19th? June the 19th, 1865 is when the news reached Galveston, Texas, that Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. All right, but it's a whole lot more complex than that. As we would say, it's deeper than that. Okay, so if you go back in American history around that time, 40 years before that, 50 years before that, you have the Indian Removal Act of 1830, right, which started the Trail of Tears, right? So you had Mississippi Choctaws, Georgia Cherokees, Florida Seminoles, along with Africans that escaped into the bush harbors and the swamps and the lowlands and the wetlands of from South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, that went west on the Trail of Tears, right? But let's go a little bit deeper. The Mexican Revolution. So we're talking 1823. I think officially Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. May have been 1823. Fact check me on that. But anyhow, the liberator of Mexico was a person of African extract. His mother was an African, and his father was a so-called nobleman of mestizo and European blood, right? But this is none other than Vicente Guerrero, right? That's why I say Viva Guerrero. Our Latin American brothers and sisters, our Mexican brothers and sisters are very familiar with Vicente Guerrero, right? As he was the first vice president, the second president of the Republico de Mexico, okay? It all goes back to the Alamo and Santa Ana. Texas wanted to save their slaves. They wanted to save the institution of slavery. So if you go back and you really study the history of the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, you will see what exactly was going on. The Mexican government allowed the descendants of the Choctaws, Cherokees, runaway Africans to come and live in Mexico if they would just take on Spanish surnames, right? But also they had to guard the frontier. You know, these Africans were fighters. They were not, you know, they didn't lay down and allow themselves to be subjugated by any government, whether it was the Mexican government or there was the government of the United States, right? But they were fighters. They were part of the militia that defended the northern border of Mexico, okay? Right? And even at this time, you can go back and you can study the militias, the black militias in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, right? That Andrew Jackson came into contact in the War of 1812, right? There was a black militia in the city of New Orleans that the white people were very, very afraid of because it was blacks bearing arms, right? This also deals with your history of the Second Amendment of the United States. I know I'm digressing, but I'm trying to get all of this stuff that's out in my head, and I want to put it out there for you to go research yourself, all right? But it's relevant today because there has been a fracture between African American people and Latino people, right? And the culprit, again, as generally in my videos, I go back to the seminal work of Dr. Neely Fuller, the United Code Compensatory textbook for thought and actions for victims of white supremacy. And again, the culprit here is white supremacy, right? Because initially, the white supremacist motto was propagated on to people of color via the Catholic Church, right? And the exploration of Christopher Columbus in 1492, it came to America with African sailors, right? But before he came over here, he was in Ghana, right? And he began to establish the trade of human cargo, as well as the gold from the Gold Coast of West Africa. In particular, at that time, it would have been the Songhai Empire, right? So you have, again, a native black population of Mexico that's on the coast, which would be Veracruz, Acapulco. And then you have those descendants of Africans in America and Seminole indigenous people, Seminole Nation, Choctaw Nation, Cherokee Nation, that went to what is would be the north of Mexico and south of Texas, right? South Texas, right? And this information is verifiable, right? I had a colleague, when I was working at a labor organization in Minnesota, and she was so proud of her South Texas heritage, right? In the sense that she stood in solidarity with African Americans, with black folks, right? So that's the historical part of it. But let me deal with it from a social perspective. All right, let me go to this these notes. All right. Juneteenth is celebrated in the Mexican village of Nacimiento de los Negros, La Muskogos. So here in Georgia, we got Muskogee County. We got, that's Columbus, Georgia, Tuskegee, Alabama, Lochapoka, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama. So those indigenous people that came from that particular area that went west, right, later became known as the Muskogos, right? So it became known as the Day of the Negroes, June the 19th, right? So in the 1850s, the Seminoles had to escape slavery, and they traveled with the Seminole Nation to Mexico to avoid being settled in Oklahoma and what that would become known as the Indian lands in North America, right? United States of America, right? But this is really what I want to talk about, and I'm going to cut it short because I got to get back on my barbecue grill and deal with my chicken and lamb, okay? All right. So, okay. The typical celebrations by the Afro-Latino, Afro-Mexican population of this town, Nacimiento, right, is what? Horseback riding, trail riding, line dancing, eating sweet potato bread, right? All this, pardon my French, all this shit is African, right? All this shit is African, okay? So nowadays, popular trend amongst African American, I don't know if it's attributed to Beyonce or whatever, in her Cowboy Carter album. But now you have African Americans putting their boots on the ground, putting their boots on and embracing their rodeo culture. You know what I'm saying? Our black culture that we gained by going west. You can go to a few videos on YouTube. I know the brother Checks in Effect. Check went to this black town in Mexico. Also Ace Live. He went to this town and they did some in-depth interviews with the descendants of Afro-Latinos, Afro-Mexicans. And there's another brother, I can't think of his name. But just type in Juneteenth celebrations in Mexico, and all of this information you can see for yourself. So again, the tide of anti-Latino, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant culture is a byproduct of white supremacy, right? Whether it's European American white supremacy or the root of European white supremacy, which began in the Iberian Peninsula. I'm speaking of Spain and Portugal and the institutions of Spain and Portugal, i.e. the Catholic Church, right? So again, I say happy Juneteenth to you. You spend a day without learning, you spend a day without living, okay? And begin to start you some traditions for Juneteenth. I'm so happy that, through a consistent struggle, Juneteenth has become, quote unquote, mainstream. But along with it being mainstream, let's remain historically accurate and start new traditions, which correspond to the blood, the sweat, the tears, the courage, the victory, and the freedom that Juneteenth represents to African Americans, to Indigenous Americans, Indigenous Mexicans, and Afro-Mexicans. Again, for all of our ancestors that suffered and triumphed through our victory here today, I have the greatest respect and admiration for our ancestors, and when I look in the mirror, I see my ancestors. I am my ancestors. Okay, with that, I say peace.